Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with the top minds and leaders from Delaware and across the United States who graciously share their perspectives, which help advance FSC's mission to build capacity, raise awareness, and really elevate school board leadership in our communities. I'm your host, Julia Kelleher, the Executive Director of First Aid Educate, and thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited about this episode. We are joined by Rony Baltazar-Lopez. He is a dynamic public servant whose leadership has already left a mark on Delaware. Wonderful personality, hugely committed to public service, a pleasure to interact with, and I know you're going to love the conversation. Rony currently serves as the Director of Policy and Communications for the Delaware Department of State, and he's also the Vice Chair of the Delaware Hispanic Commission. And he brings always a voice to the issues of representation, equity, community engagement. He's from Delaware, graduate of the Milford School District. He served on the Milford School Board as well, which I'm excited to talk to him about that. And he also ran for the House of Representatives. So he's civically engaged, huge proponent of public service. He's been recognized by the Delaware Business Time and in his community by and large. So I'm excited to get for you a chance to get to hear our conversation and to get to know him a little bit better. And we'll talk about how policy, community, and really creating opportunities and what that means for folks in our state. So Rony, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Julia, for having me.
What an experience, huh? I mean, you've just done a lot of things.
Yeah, people tell me that I should really just, focus on doing other things, but it's so energizing to do this work and to continue just, helping the community. And I like it.
Yeah, it's great. It's really wonderful that you do give so much back, and there's a lot to say, maybe tell us the story about how you got into public service, but really, you ran for school board. So kind of what was the path to that?
Yeah. So just as a son of immigrants, I've always, noticed the disparities when it comes to like integration of immigrants and people whose primary language is in English. So with that, growing up brought a lot of challenges, barriers, things that I think could have been easier for me if I wasn't a son of immigrants or wasn't having parents whose primary language was English. But so what really motivated me to run for school board, I have two younger brothers. We are 12 years apart with my middle brother, and then 14 years apart with my youngest brother. And so when I ran for school board, they were still in public school. Both of them were in middle school. And so I thought to myself, this is an opportunity to, kind of challenge the status quo. It's a good way to find ways where we can root out some of those disparities. And, people who serve on school boards usually have a personal connection. They have a personal tie to why they want to run. And for me, it wasn't because I had a son or a daughter in the school system, but I had two brothers and I had other family members who had kids. And so for me, when I was looking at the school board composition at the time, it was primarily men. It was those older than 50. And when I was trying to look for other school boards across the state about, just the representation on school boards, it was kind of the same dynamic. And so for me, it was a challenge. It was like an aspirational goal to kind of run on the school board to not just make change, but also to, make sure that our students and our communities could see themselves in these positions, because I think it's really important when it comes to education that everybody gets involved, not just parents and community members, but also, the students who may at some point see themselves in these positions.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love, this notion of your words, sort of challenging the status quo, like something needs to change, right? Because the world is evolving. But inside of that, and what's always been important to me is that the boards reflect the communities that they serve.
Yeah.
And what does representation really mean? And if something is representative of a community, kind of what does that look like? And I think this is, you're probably better versed in the stats given your positions, but the Latino community is about 35% of the overall student population. And when you look at 100 board members across the state, we don't see that same level of representation for those communities.
That's 100% accurate. And I, again, go back to like when I was looking for people who look like me that were serving these positions, I found one, and that's a colleague of mine who I've worked with in some capacities, and that was Jose Matthews, who served on the school board. Yvette Santiago, who serves on the Newcastle County Tech School. And besides that, down here in Sussex County, it was like no one. And so, and when it comes to our population, the Hispanic, Latino, Spanish speaking population, and even to some extent Haitian Creole individuals, when we talk about why we have challenges with our students not being prepared enough to go to college or a trade or into the workforce, or when we're talking about why we have disciplinary issues, I also think it stems because we don't have people who have that experience or those lived experiences, whether it's personal experiences or experiences from members of their own family or community. And so I think your notion about like when it comes to not having representation, even though our population is there, is very instrumental to all that.
Yeah. Another issue that maybe I could ask you to talk a little bit about that I also feel connected to is being bilingual, and the ability to have, to speak in two languages, I think is a phenomenal strength. A lot of times it gets cast in a school system as, you're learning English rather than, you're learning two languages, because everyone's learning two languages when they're 8 years old. It doesn't matter, so, and it's a lifelong journey. I mean, anyone who's always trying to refine their written or oral communication skills. But what was it like, for you, because you came from a bilingual household, and being someone on a board, being able to actually hear the concerns of people who, if you're in a monolingual household, you're not even it's no judgment, but you're just not familiar with it because that's not your lived experience.
Yes. I think that issue in itself is twofold, right? When we have people whose primary language is Spanish, it is more commonly than not that they are immigrants or people who have come here as foreigners. And so they already have kind of a setback by not understanding the education system in the United States, vastly different from their respective countries. But then also having to challenge themselves with not understanding the language. And that's another barrier, which to some extent, I believe, when children are being raised in the households, they are expected to be kind of the translator, the interpreter, or the liaison between the school and the family, which in itself is problematic because we always think about who's going to be the advocate for the child, but what does it mean when the child is his or her own advocate, right? And having to navigate those things is difficult. So being bilingual and understanding two different languages has been a blessing. Growing up, I was able to be that advocate. I had to be for myself and for my family. And so growing into this position in the school board, it was like I was hearing things from members of the community that they couldn't necessarily express to anybody else because they didn't have that liaison. It was also just many experiences that were, shared to me that I lived through or that my family had lived through. So I understood, and I brought them to the table whenever I could, whenever it was a good topic of discussion for the board. And I think in general, just having the ability to speak multiple languages is all about community, right? If you want to unite the community, you have to be able to meet people where they're at. And if that's with their home language, then I think that's what we should be able to do. But we know that resources are already limited in schools. But there's just some areas of improvement that I think that, schools can improve on when it comes to the community.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to ask one more question, but I just had a random thought that came into my mind. I was thinking, oh, geez, I really hope that, members of the community that do speak two languages are listening to this, and that language being Spanish, because that's sort of where we are right now. But I wonder, and I know I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I will ask you sort of on air, but we should do this maybe in Spanish too, because I think that's really, we want more people to raise their hand and say, I can contribute, and we need to make that accessible. So maybe we put that out for a future date.
I'd be happy to. I would have to just kind of work on the Spanish a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question about the being a school board member. The timing, we didn't sort of talk through that, but it was during COVID, right? So what a challenging time to be making decisions. What'd you learn from that? What was that like?
It was honestly one of the most challenging parts of it's already a challenge to be a school board member. For those who are listening, right, the school board members are unpaid volunteers who serve, because they want to serve, not because they're getting any financial benefit from it. And so when we were being tasked on school boards to make health decisions, because many of the decisions at the state level were being, in terms of education, were being left to school boards. And so when we were having to make decisions about distancing, masks, and other health protocols, it was like most of us on these school boards are not professionals. We're not trained health care professionals. And so leaving those decisions to school boards kind of left a disparity in itself among different school districts, because you had some school districts who followed strict guidelines with COVID, and when it came to remote learning, some others, were more lenient. And so that in itself was just a disparity among the disparities already happening in education. And for me, it was like a learning curve, because I had just gotten appointed in 2019. And the pandemic happened around January of 2020, and we fully shut down. I think it was in March. And so that in itself was like, wow, like I can't focus on what I wanted to focus on and on my tenureship. Now I have to divert my attention to focusing on how we're going to educate our students, especially our most vulnerable students, whether they're people with disabilities, students who are multilingual learners, or low-income students as well. And, being that hub for not just the health protocol, but also making sure that they're being fed, they get access to computers and access to materials. And it was just, I believe it was one of the hardest times. And I commend anybody who was serving in this capacity, because it was one of the miscellaneous things that we were thrown into.
And pretty weighty topic. And I think it is, again, I appreciate you calling it out, because the first aid educator is really just here to elevate this role of school boards, right? And to understand that there's a sacrifice, it's a huge commitment. There's just a lot that goes into this. It's a very, very, very important role. And I'm not sure that to date it's been perceived with the level of seriousness that it actually carries. Exactly. If we look at all the changes at federal level right now, it's becoming increasingly important that you've got solid decision making.
Yep.
Yeah. So did you get trained? I want to move into the second topic to talk about, kind of that last answer brings us here. Training and professional development. What kind of support? Was this a lot of just learning as you go and talking to other people, or how did you get up to speed?
That's a very interesting question, because at the time when I was appointed to the board, I had a sit-down meeting with the superintendent, the chief financial officer, and we just went over the budget, some other administrative things with the school board, but there wasn't really a comprehensive guide. There was no comprehensive training. We did luckily have a membership with the Delaware School Board Association, which provides its annual training on school board, like a boot camp 101. And that really did help kind of emphasize the role of the school board. I think it's just this general misunderstanding among not just the community, but I think personnel and even school board members who are elected, that when you were elected, that you're going to be handling a lot of the administrative processes. And that's actually false. The main role of the school board is to balance a budget and to make sure that the superintendent, which is the only employee that the school board manages, and provided oversight and is held accountable for his or her actions. And that's essentially the biggest role. And obviously, if you're an officer, whether you're the president of the school board, you have a little bit more of a influence when it comes to accountability. But there was very little training at the time when I was on the school board. And I know that those processes have improved. I know there was some legislation in the General Assembly that passed. I think some of the main sponsors were like Senator Sturgeon and maybe Medina Wilson Anton, about providing financial training as a requirement for school board members once they're elected. And I think that was a beneficial bill to make sure that those who are elected get that training, because at the end of the day, their decisions impact the pockets of the taxpayers in the community.
1,000%. I mean, you touched on so many great points there.
Mhm.
I do think DSBA has tried to provide support. I also think that it's a huge volume of information. I mean, the range of things that a school district covers that the board is providing oversight for.
Yeah.
And the other great point that you just made was about the difference between the management and the governance, and sort of we're not in really boards aren't in the administrivia, but
Mhm.
it's a common misperception because when there's a complaint, who does the community may call?
Yeah.
The board.
Yeah.
So, in terms of topics, what do you think are like the most important topics? That like for boards, assume a person, and they know something, right? But let's say that it's year two.
Mhm.
What is it, finance? Is it literacy? Is it how to evaluate the superintendent? I mean, what do you think is kind of fundamental in terms of understanding from boards?
I think if I were to rank a couple of the most important tenets of being a school board member and a school board as a whole, I think it would be one, knowing and understanding how to evaluate the superintendent, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that relationship with the superintendent, I think, is also a big one. And I speak in my own personal capacity that, working with the superintendent can make or break your tenureship at the school
Mm-hmm.
board,
Mm-hmm.
um, because you want to make sure that you're meeting your own goals as a school board member and those that
Mm-hmm.
you're representing. And you can only do that through the help of the superintendent. So having a
Mm-hmm.
good relationship with him or her is
Mm-hmm.
fundamental to achieving the
Mm-hmm.
goal, but also making sure that you're able to hold him or her accountable. And whether
Mm-hmm.
that's an annual evaluation or just a periodic like check-ins with the superintendent is fundamental,
Mm-hmm.
because beyond the board, there's really no accountability for the superintendents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I would rank that as number one. Number two, I would say it's the finances, because many of us on school boards who have served on school boards don't have the financial training. It's very complicated to understand like titles and different facets of the funding, whether it's the federal
Mm-hmm.
funding, state funding, or local funding.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's a misconception there in itself that people believe that we receive the majority of our funding through federal funds, and that's
Mm-hmm.
really the case. It's more of the local and the state that we depend on.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that, and then I think for number three, with something that I think school boards in general should really, I think the important thing that school boards should have knowledge on is more like that relationship building with external stakeholders, whether that's the
Mm-hmm.
local community, local legislators, and different government bodies, because
Mm-hmm.
we're all interconnected. Schools depend on the cities or municipalities for sidewalk accessibility, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or transportation to making sure that the routes are accessible. Um, Different things like that. And from the state, obviously the funds, we rely so heavily on state funds that the work and the payments for personnel would not be possible
Mm-hmm.
without state money.
Right. Yeah, I think you made that's I love this point at that because it's often overlooked, the inner relationships or the interconnectivity between district operations and the communities or the municipality where they're seated. I mean, districts do what they do, but they drive on a road. I mean, so it all plays into each other.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing, though, I think that's really interesting. I don't know if you've had this happen where the federal funds, for example, they're intended for specific purposes, right? So they're restricted more or less. And
Yeah.
I have had a lot of experiences. I wonder if you've had the same, where somebody says, "But you have money. You have all this money." The
Mhm.
problem is you're only allowed to use that money for X. You can't use that money for Y. So in essence, what looks like 100 million is actually a zero.
Yeah, we would. That was kind of part of the training on the finances, that what we see on those spreadsheets doesn't necessarily mean that that's all the money we have or all the money that we spent. Some of that money
Mhm.
is encumbered, and we can only use it for specific programs or activities.
Mhm.
Federal government, I believe, funds specifically for homeless populations and for
Mhm.
other like very specific programs that
Mhm.
have to abide by those restrictions and guidelines. And so,
Right.
when we go into referendums, for example, and when people look at our budgets, they're like, well, you have money from the federal government that you can't you can't use that. And it's like
Right.
to explain that
No.
process that
Hmm.
it's encumbered, and that's why we're coming to you as local taxpayers to
Hmm.
build school or to fund different things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's complex. And even, now today, two recent changes. I don't know if you've heard much of this talk in your community, but the new funding formula that Delaware wants to put forward, which is going to bring a lot of change and a lot of newness. And the second thing is the property reassessments that
Yeah.
work kind of, all the talk and still are in Newcastle County, at least.
So, yeah. Luckily for Sussex, it hasn't been.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's no one wants their taxes to go up, and especially not
Hmm.
significantly, and not
Hmm.
especially because it was like just a mistake that happened.
Hmm.
I definitely understand that from a local perspective.
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely complex. But hopefully, whatever they create as a new system, you know what I mean, that'll wind up putting us in a better place, and then we'll go forward from there. Um, so to bring us to the last segment, I'd love to hear your thoughts around community. You've done so much public service. You really are. You represented you made this choice for your family and for your community to have that voice being represented. But even in the public service that you do now, being on the commission, I mean, you're all of a lot of what you do is really making sure that the community's voice is present. And
Yeah.
what do you think? Why is that important, so that we can help the audience understand why that's important, and then I guess second, how do we do that? What are some great ways to do that?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, right? Like why, and then how do we improve our system so that it's more represented or representative of
Hmm.
people and communities. The why I think begins with personal, right? A lot of people do, you know, they get into careers or they make personal choices because of personal experiences.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of us have experiences from public education. But I think, again, it goes back to we don't see ourselves in these positions. We don't think that we have the time for these positions. We don't think,
Hmm.
especially people of color, people of low income, they tend to believe that they're not qualified for these positions.
Hmm.
Um, and also, I think we think that we're not educated enough to be in these positions. And I will say from a personal experience, which, looking back before I served on the school board, I didn't know what a school board did. I kind of assumed that the school board, was in charge, and I thought that they were the ones who were setting the administrative processes and regulations and stuff like that for schools and policies. But comes out after serving on the school board that that's not the case. They provide oversight, and that oversight is very limited to whatever monthly meetings the school board has as a whole. I think for educational purposes, right, the a school board only has power when it meets a quorum, and beyond that, school board members alone don't dictate policy. They are
Hmm.
just members of the community, and so understanding that like all those facets contribute to why people don't get engaged. And so for me personally, and my personal mission has always been to break down barriers for people who look like me, who speak the same language as me, or come with with or who have parents who have immigrated to this country. And so my mission has been to open those doors, but also leave the doors open for that next individual to pop in and to see themselves in these positions, because
Hmm.
it can't just be a one-time show or a one-time thing that you break barriers, but only for yourself, and then you move that ladder and make it
Hmm.
for the next person.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that, I guess, leads to the how do we improve those systems so that people can get more engaged. And I think it's more,
Hmm.
and it's ironic because we're talking about education, but it's additional education, right? Educating the community about what it means to be on a school board, how to run for school board, how to get engaged. And it doesn't really just matter that like we don't necessarily have to be in these positions to make change. We can also be advocates in ourselves by attending school board meetings, by
Hmm.
being in, by making sure that, for example, parents are, when available, try to make an effort to be making parent teacher conferences, staying engaged with their student
Hmm.
progress, and not being afraid to seek help. I think is also an important thing to kind of talk about, right? I think my parents were just assumed that I was doing good, for example, in school when I was growing up, that they didn't feel the need to get involved. They also were kind of afraid of just government officials, and school districts are, government bodies. And so for them, it was like, I think that they're doing the best that they can for my child. So, I'm going to leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, it's like when you look deeper than at the surface level, you start to realize that there are ways that schools can improve, or students can be taught a better way, or there are better ways to advocate for your child. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's always been like, when I tell people that I served on the school board, it's like, but I also leave you with, you don't have to serve on a school board to be engaged. Tune in.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're a community member, you're paying taxes to your local school.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to know where those tax dollars are going
Sure.
and what they're being funneled to.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sometimes can be cumbersome for some families, especially for our lower income families who may be more preoccupied with feeding their families or going to work, doing other things. But it's also like, making sure that we can get that time so that we're engaged, and not just engaged, but making sure that from the non-recipient end, that we're providing access
Mm-hmm.
people to begin with, because that looks like, making our school board meetings remote and hybrid,
Mm-hmm.
that more
Mm-hmm.
people tune in, and allowing public comment during remote sessions
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
It means making people aware of these school board meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to first, they're not going to understand what a school board is, let alone when their meetings occur. So making sure that we're using all different avenues to spread the message, spread when
Mm-hmm.
school board meetings occur, so that more people can attend, or at least we can say we have attempted to engage the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it also just means like, making documents accessible to the public,
Mm-hmm.
and at, if possible, also allowing the community to understand those documents, whether they're finances and stuff, because it's not
Mm-hmm.
just to say, oh, well, we post our public.
Posted it. Right.
It's also like, do they really understand what they're looking at, right? Because if
Right.
you're looking at a budget and I'm just looking at the expenses for the last month, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know where we stand as a school district, right? Because
Correct.
I'm just seeing one part of the budget. And
Right.
so I think there's a lot of parts in which we can improve in engagement, but I also believe that the first step is making sure that people understand the why they should get engaged.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. It's a two-way. It's a sort of a two-way street, and there's got to be sort of bi-directionality there, where the district, if I wanted to get engaged, but then all I see is this set of numbers and I don't have any content, what I mean? Then I don't know. So I do think it has to come from both sides. Um, and this point about attending the school board meetings and being involved, we at First Aid Educate also share that belief and understanding. We have an ambassador program. It's on our website. We pay people to, what I mean, because it's your time and you should be compensated for your time. But I think there's maybe not everyone knows about it, because I think that more people want to and wish to, but don't know exactly how to. And
Yeah.
so this ambassador role that's the person that goes around to the other people to help the other people then find out more, right? And I think when you build that kind of network, it makes many, many more things possible.
Yes, it does. And I've noticed just in my 3 year tenure on the school board, that it really does matter when you try to reach out to communities that haven't been reached out to before. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
to be, a racial community. It can also be low income communities. It can be
Sure.
even just anyone who is being served by the school district. Making sure that they are informed makes a
Mm-hmm.
difference.
Mm-hmm.
And when I ran for my seat, I was learning that people were inspired to not just see someone different, but also just seeing somebody who was actually running a campaign in the district for a school board, instead of like something
Mm-hmm.
like we tend to think of general elections, like for state reps or state
Right.
house, state senate, presidential elections, but we never think about school board elections, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it is also it occurs, or they occur usually during the spring,
Right.
and not during the general election cycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Confuses people. And then the requirements to vote in a school board election are a little bit different. They're similar, but
Right.
they're different, right? You just have to live in the district and be a U.S. citizen, be over 18
Mm-hmm.
years old. But I think people think that you have to be like registered with the school district,
Right.
vote, and that's not true at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, very, very important. So we also try to put all that information out there so people know. Rony, this has been such a fabulous conversation. Again, I said at the beginning, I just applaud how much you've done and how much you've given to public service and that commitment to your community. So many great tidbits that I've gotten from today's call, the importance of challenging the status quo and redefining what representation really means, looking at language as a strength and understanding the differences that you said something really insightful. I think that public education system here looks vastly different than what it looks like in other countries. And for us to understand that, embrace that, and accommodate that, which sort of brought us to the end point of what does accessibility really mean? How are we inviting people in? So just a fabulous conversation. Thank you for
Thank
being part of our work. Thank you for being a great school board member, and continued success in all that you do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And for our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. If you liked today's episode, please go over to the Knowledge Hub where you can find more information around school board capacity building, as well as the resources available for multi-language learners. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.